Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Quantum Bridge again. We have Donal and Jasmine return. Welcome to the show, guys. It's good to have you back.
It's great to be back, both of you.
Casper, we're going to carry on, I believe, from our previous show. So if you want to get that started for us, it's a little bridge into this
over
one.
to me, is it?
Yes.
Hello, Gary. Hello, Donal. Hello, Jasmine. Lovely to see you all.
Hi,
Hi,
Casper.
how are you?
Sometimes, man.
Oh, very good. Thank you. Very good. And for the audience as well, yeah, absolutely. The guys have joined us before, and hopefully you've engaged with that material, which was a wonderful first recording. And we're going to move on. And as promised, we're going to look at solutions for extricating yourselves from the system. I think we're all keen to hear how that might be done. But just before we do that, just as really more as a recap than anything else, Donal, because this falls into your area the most, would you just mind giving that overview again of, and very briefly, of the currency versus money, and really why now we're segueing into, and why it's so important to look at how to create wealth and legacy wealth?
Thank you. Yes, just to briefly recap again, the difference between currency and money is gold and silver really is money, and currency is basically a medium of exchange and arrives into the system in the form of debt. And because we have had nothing to back it since 1971, since Richard Nixon took us off the standard in took us off the gold standard in 1971 for good, we have been printing money basically on promissory notes from the US government or the Federal Reserve or whatever, literally into oblivion, which is why we have problems now. And why this is so important to your listeners and to everybody that is involved, and all of us, right, is that when you understand the difference between currency and money, you will understand, right, when you're saving what you think is money, but it is actually currency you're saving, you're probably wondering, how have you done this for 25, 30 years? And all of a sudden it's coming time to retire. And you're seeing that the buying power, value versus price, the value is not there. And the reason it's not there is because they have too much money printed, too much currency, printed into the system with basically no regard at all for what they have done to the human race.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And a key little part of that message there that is pivotal is the thing about buying power. Because people see the figure in their bank, well, that hasn't gone down. In fact, maybe that's gone up slightly with some level of interest, and even with compound interest over years and whatever. But when they look at it in the reality, in the cold light of day, against how many apples could they have bought with that back when they started saving versus now, or all of those other, it's a very simplistic example, but actually it's then that the realization is it's not about those figures, it's about the power in terms of purchasing that those figures should represent and no longer do.
And that is why you could very well ask the question, has gold and silver gone up or has the currency gone down?
Yeah.
Right? Because going way back, they always said that an ounce of gold would always be able to buy a decent outfit, a decent three-piece suit, right, with top hat and expensive shoes and all that. And I suppose if you went into, a Savile Row or something like that, like to a good shop and got a good quality suit, it would be about probably $2,000. Do you know what I mean? I know you can get suits for less than that, right? But they always said it would be about the price of a good suit, right? So it's not really the price of gold and silver has gone up. It is the value of the currency has gone down. But that's why gold and silver is so good, right? Because it holds value. Price and value. There's big difference between price and value. What's the price? What's the value?
Yeah, absolutely.
Donal is a really, I think, clear example that this was all new for me, that really brought it home with the houses. Yeah.
One good way for people, and we're going to go into the solutions now as we promised, right? And this now is the start of the solutions. But just to give you an example, And this is a real fact, and I could actually do this probably for you in any country that you're in, but we'll just do this for Ireland. I challenged a real estate agent, an auctioneer that's 35, 40 years in business in Ireland. So it's fair to say he's an expert at what he does, right? So I challenged him. He's on one of our calls, right? And I challenged him. I said, will you ever tell me a particular area in the town you live in that the house, what was the price of the house in the year 2000? And what was it today? So he came back a week later and he said, this house was 330,000 in 00, and it is 440 last year, 2022. So I worked out the price of gold that time. It would have cost, right, 1,367 ounces of gold to buy it in 2000. It was only 225 ounces in 2022. Yeah. Now if that does not explain the difference between price and value, what does? Yeah. And so the question to ask, and this is part of the education, was gold dear in 2000 or cheap? Yeah. So it was obviously dear, right? Because you needed more of it, right, to buy the house. Now people say to me that gold is too dear. Well, it's at a bargain. It's at an absolute bargain. You only needed 22 years later, 225 ounces, or 240, I'm not too sure, something like that, to buy the same house.
Yeah. This leads me to a question I was going to ask you, Donal, because you mentioned last time about when you was buying silver and gold, and it's gone up in price. Now, I wasn't so lucky. I was only started buying silver a year or so ago. So, and again, we're not here for investment advice, but just generally speaking, someone may think, well, I've missed the boat,
But I just gave the example.
Yeah. But I don't think I have personally, but so you would agree that there's still very sound security and investment in these precious metals.
Well, I just gave that example. So the best thing that you can all do, whoever is listening to this, right, whatever village and town and city you're living in, just do that exercise. Just do that exercise. Find out what a price of a house was, right, in 2000 in your area, and check what price it is today. Divide it, right, by around $250 an ounce in 00, and divide it, right, by $2,000 an ounce today, and you'll find anyone can do this. I don't care where I do this in the world, it usually comes up trumps, right? So that proves it without a shadow of a doubt that you haven't missed the boat. And when it comes to silver, silver, I think, is the only commodity, on earth at the moment that is trading below its 1980 high. It hit $50 for a little bit, right, when the Hunt brothers tried to corner the market, right? It hit $50 sometime in 1980. I'm not too sure when in 1980. And which is the only commodity, I think, on earth today that's trading at 50% of its 1980 high. So no one has missed the boat in silver, that's for sure. Anyway, I think the only thing that's selling cheaper at the moment is the computer chips or something like that. Something like that is selling cheaper than it was in 1980 or something like that. So if you want to know price and value, there's a great way to do it. Price it against property, the value against property, the ratio, the gold and silver ratio against property, and vice versa. And you'll see what we're talking about in a 25-year period.
Yeah, and I think it's important for the education aspect as we go forward to address both wealth creation, from whether you started a year ago or you're starting right now, and why it matters to start, why the education matters for wealth preservation, because there's the idea of creating it, but what is actually going to hold value for you over time is a very important question, right? So,
well, totally right. And if there's listeners here today listening and they're lucky enough to be earning good money, and that they're in a privileged position and they're earning good currency, we'll say, not good money, right? Brilliant. I'm delighted for you, right? But definitely you need to start turning it into some solid assets like property. So property, in my opinion, is too expensive at the moment. So I think there's a big correction coming in it. So I would be a little weary at the moment of property. but definitely gold and silver. And again, of course, we say it's not advice, but it's just what we're doing, right? And it has never, ever, it never failed. And the nice thing about gold and silver as well is that you can offload it instantly. Instantly. I mean, absolute instantly, right? You know, the platforms will buy it back off of you. Probably central banks would buy it off of you. But property, even in a boom, can take you 12 to 16 weeks before you actually see money, even in a boom, right? And if there's a glitch in the market or a little bit of a tanking going on, which I see is going on, is starting a little bit in the UK. I think it's here as well. It's after softening. Then you could be stuck with a property for 12 months. But one way or another, right, try to turn it into a solid asset, because when you understand currency, you are in a downward cycle with it all the time.
Another thing I think that's interesting is that once people actually own solid assets, just what Donal said, you can actually buy things with them. This is not, theory. You bought a house with it.
Oh, you can.
So
you can.
So you really can immediately use it.
It is money.
It is money.
It is money. And a decent vaulting service will give you what they call an SKR cert in it, a safekeeping receipt. So if you wanted to buy something with your gold and silver, if someone is willing to take that, they can get the SKR receipt right from the vault and go to any bank with it and say, that's where did you think the saying came from? It's as good as gold.
Yeah.
And part of education is we do what we've learned. We do what's easy and convenient for us. And I think most of us would agree that we've been conditioned in a system to use currency and think it is money in a certain way. So when we're empowered around how to create and how to actually preserve wealth with real assets, it's very empowering to learn how can you use that, how easy is it actually to use that. And the barrier to learning about that is now so low. And once this becomes your new normal, really, the sky is the limit. So that's an important part, I think, of empowerment and education, is how easy it can be.
And I'm going to preempt maybe another question that will be coming here, right? As people are probably listening and saying, well, what about my dividend? I'm not getting any dividend, right? And that's true. That's true. There is a way that you can get dividend out of gold and silver, but I'm not going to go into it here. It's part of, it's much more detailed than this, right? But there is a way, but for all intents and purposes, yes, you are right. There is no dividend really out of gold and silver, especially when you own the real asset itself. And you're saying, I'm getting my 4 or 5% dividend out of X share and this share. That's great. Well done. Well done to you, right? But look at what inflation is doing. And look at then that we're back to price and value again. And I'm not saying to put all of your currency into it, but Jesus, if you understand it, right, you won't be long, right, seeing this is a mug's game to be saving on a downward spiral, right,
Because no matter what, if that saving is giving you, even let's just take banal examples of 5% a year net versus the real value of or the real rate that we're seeing in terms of inflation, even if we park that and we go with the rates we're being given, you're still losing spending power each year.
Yes. And we spoke the last day about inflation, and that they have the audacity to tell us, right, it is 9%, and we know that goods and services are 35, 40, and we're heading to triple digits. But we'll just take bank interest rates. This is something that people don't understand at all. We were coming from almost zero when they started rising the bank interest rates. So let's just say that we were at 1%, and I think it's some places we're at 0.5%. So let's just say we're at 1% interest rates, and the ECB and the Federal Reserve the Fed puts up the interest rate by 1%. That's 100%. They just doubled your interest rate. So when we saw this being done before, when they were trying to control economies, right, when the Fed was doing this before, they were coming from a point, right, where interest rates were at 17 and 18%, and there were double-digit interest rates. So they were able to drop and able to rise. And if you rise at interest rates by 1% when it's 10%, it's only 10% euros. But when you raise interest rates by 1% when it's 1%, It's 100% euros at buy. And this is why the system is breaking. Now, this is why it's actually breaking banks, because they have these T-bills that's killing them, right? That they if there's a run on them, they have to sell them at a loss, right? To pay out the, and it's exactly what happened to SVB Bank, the Silicon Valley Bank.
Yeah.
So it's just important to know that.
No, that's great. And I'm sure in other videos we do together, we'll revisit these things, because these things for us all bear repetition, don't they? Because we've been so conditioned for our entire life to think of these systems in a certain way. To unravel those scripts is going to take more than a few minutes with the Quantum Bridge and the Quantum Mogul guys having a chat.
No problem.
But it is a
We're
great
here for it. We're here for it.
it is a great start. Okay, so because we're all about, you guys included, we're all about solutions and empowerment and sovereignty. So what are maybe some of the things that either people can start thinking about, or potentially actually action they can take? Again, of course, we can't give them that as advice, but what we can say is these are the things that certainly you guys and Gary have been doing to at least, one, retain wealth, and secondly, potentially actually grow real wealth. So if you guys are willing to touch on that for a few moments, that would be lovely.
I think the first place to start is a wealth audit. It's actually to know in terms of, what are your obligations? What are your debts? What do you have coming in? What are you spending on? What are you extraneously spending on? To have that overview picture. This is one of the hardest things that I actually learned, and I'm learning from Donal, because we resist this. We don't want to look at bad news, or we don't want to look at the credit card bill, or we want to be in the state of feeling happy and comfortable around wealth. But actually, wealth is about making empowered choices. And so knowing where you're at right now without judgment and without beating yourself up can help you create the plan that's right for you when it comes to wealth creation and legacy wealth preservation. I'll let you take the rest of it.
You're right.
I'd say that's really the starting point.
You're right. Everyone, all of us, at every time, none of us will ever grow out of this. At the least every quarter, maybe every month, by right. I personally do it every month. I do it every single month. And it's been made so easy now to spend currency, tap, that we don't feel it. If you put 200 pounds, euros or dollars into your pocket, you'd be a lot slower spending it in cash than you would right by tapping. So it is so important, yes, as you said, to do the audit on yourself, look at the bills and say, what could I really have done without this month? And look at the difference that would have made if I just bought an ounce of silver, 2 ounces, or even an ounce of gold. Look at the difference it would make. And the point, and the most important thing is, a lot of people say to me, I don't have anything left over at the end of the month. But when you do the audit, we have always found a couple of £100. We have always, and that's 8 or 10 ounces of silver. And the point I'm making is, what is the harm of having the 10 ounces of silver if you had blown it anyway in something silly because you hadn't done an audit on yourself?
And this is where it's really important, I think, to normalize for everyone that we have very powerful emotions around what we consider to be money. We already talked about our emotional connection to self-worth, net worth, and self-worth. I'm broke, I don't have monies, or I'm not valuable, or I'm less valuable than this really wealthy person. All sorts of stories that are going around that we inherited, as you said before, Caspa, from our families, from the communities we grew up in, from, did we go to university or not? Did this happen? Did this not happen? Was the partner wealthy? Were they not wealthy? There's so many money stories that we take on board. And it's important to define for ourselves, what are some of the triggers for us to spend, right? Emotionally, do we do it after a hard week because our boss was mean? And so, we go out and we buy everyone a couple of drinks and, we feel good again. Or, in my case, I love fashion. So can we think a little bit about the impact of fast fashion or fashion on the planet? It's about really getting intentional and understanding what your triggers are, what you truly value, because you were talking about price and value, what you really value. And if you are valuing financial peace of mind, and if you are valuing wealth creation, and if you are valuing financial sovereignty, so that you have a say, not governments or not banks, over your financial future and the legacy that you want to leave the earth and how you want to enjoy in this lifetime, then that higher value can help you repattern what I would call reactive money money habits, reactive ways in which we tend to, it's for other people, it's holding on to that money, right? That could be invested, right? That they've got it parked in savings. So I'm not saying it's just about spending. It can actually be moving money that you're holding on to into something that is actually going to preserve wealth longer for you. Would I be right in saying that these are important as well?
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't say this is necessarily a good thing, but we did bring it up in another show we did about silver, where, you know, once you start buying it, you become quite attached to that. And there's in some ways, for me at least, a little bit of that retail therapy in actually buying the silver. So I think, well, rather than wasting it on rubbish, it's like, okay, well, I'll buy this. And then I'm also, once that's done, I'm less reluctant to actually dip into any of that, you know, because I value it instinctively. I value it way more than the paper money. So once I've done that, I'm like, okay, you know, I'm gonna have to be in a real tricky spot to touch that stuff now.
The paper currency.
And another tip that I would give, right? When you've done the audit on yourself, and it needs to be a regular one, right? At least every quarter, but I do it every month, right? And I'm extremely hard on myself, right? It's probably one of my weaknesses. I am hard on myself. But whatever I see that I wasted in that month that I just audited myself, the next month I paid myself that money first before I paid another bill. So if it was $200 or $2,000 or pounds or euros, if I saw that was what I wasted without and bought things that I really could have done without, or I could have done a better job on it, I pay myself that amount next month to make absolutely sure. And that amount that I pay myself always goes into precious metals, always.
Beautiful.
Well, I do think it's an important point you made, that you can use it. A lot of people think, well, if I put it into something like that, then it's difficult if I get into a tricky spot. And it's like, no, it's not. You can liquidate it quite quickly.
You can liquidate it very quickly. It is, and I am a big property advocate as well, by the way, right? I mean, my background, first thing that I ever did in business was property, right? So I'm a big property believer, but just right at the moment, it's a little dangerous. Yeah. And as I said again, it's not as liquid as a commodity. That's all. It is good to have it though, but you need an awful lot more currency to buy property. But it is a good thing to have. And bear in mind, you know, when we keep talking about commodities, gold and silver, some people think we're bullion dealers. We're not. We're not. We're like, I buy online like everybody else, right? So it's something that we truly passionately believe in, because we've seen it working over a consistent period of time.
Yeah, just a quick interjection, by the way. So people might have seen that. It depends on when our videos go out, but we have a relationship, an affiliate with the Pure Gold Company, and we also have a similar one with Hatton Garden Metals. So both of those are in the UK. One of the people that we work with has a very good affiliation with Miles Franklin in the US. So that's Dr. Kia Pruitt. And the other person that we're having on shortly that might be interesting to you guys, actually, you may or may not resonate with this, but a guy called Jason Cousins, who's the CEO of Glint. Now, Glint is a company where you literally get a card, and when you pay into Glint, or you can pay into Glint in such a way that you're actually stockpiling gold, and you go and with your equivalent of a debit card, it is a debit card, you can literally spend from your gold account, so without any need to sell the gold back or trade it back.
I was actually telling you about this system. That's it's so interesting you're telling me about this, because literally 3 weeks ago I found out about this and I'm like, we need this. So we're excited. We're actually excited to hear this episode.
As another ancillary, I mean, Gary and I, we're not in a position at the moment to pour currency into gold and silver, but we know that that's where we would go. At least we know that. But that ability with the card as well, just as another, I love the way that you've presented this, by the way, in terms of, look, property, if you can, gold and silver, we've done it where we can, you know, and that all of these things are taking it from the system. So disempowering the system,
that's exactly,
and empowering ourselves, you know.
That is exactly it. You're bringing back the sovereignty to yourself, and this is the reason, and we might want to cover this in another episode. This is the reason that I talk about the central bank digital currency is the most dangerous thing that ever has hit the universe outside of the atom bomb, because that is the last straw. If they have control over the currency in a digital way, they have control over where you buy it. And I wouldn't put it past them that they would stop you buying gold and silver. It wouldn't. Nothing would surprise me with these authorities, right? And this is why this must be stopped. I'm not against progression. I'm not against Bitcoin, or I'm not against digital currency. I'm all for progression, but not controlled by the powers that issue the currency, because we have seen what they've done with the currency as we had it. They completely made a dog's dinner of it. Well, we know now that they have the control over the digits inside in our account. And they have started this in the US already, where they were paying pandemic payments, right, to people and for food vouchers and all that. Well, these people weren't going to care, because they don't, some of these people never go back to work anyway. They don't contribute to society anyway. And like, the world is broken into 20% at the bottom, 20% at the top, and 60% in the middle. The middle class is what keeps the whole world going. And who did in the 2008 crash, when all the banks made a mistake, who did they blame at the end of it? The teachers, I think. They started blaming teachers. Where did they come up with this, right? So, I mean, it's the people.
The middle class has always been a great target. It's a bit like car drivers. It's another reason why they go after car drivers, is because the middle class are there to toe the line. You've got people, and sorry for those who don't have class systems. In fact, you're very lucky if you don't, right? but let's just talk about it in terms of quote unquote wealth, right? So you've got the haves, the have-nots, and the bit in the middle, which is the sort of have a bit, right? Those guys are no help to the people at the top, right? And the reason that they aren't is because they're generally fairly well educated or aware, right? So they also ask questions. They can be a real pain for those people who want to control everything. So actually, at the moment, believe it or not, the target has been for a long time to shrink and disempower the middle class. And since most of us are in that, to whatever degree, even if we consider ourselves working class, right? A lot of us will be come into that. And if that goes, there's going to be two groups of people: a very small group with virtually everything, basically call it everything, and everybody else. And it's just our decision: do we want it to go like that? And if we feed that system, that's what we're doing, feeding that system.
And that is exactly it. And this is where you have the power, because again, we call it education or awareness. If you are aware of this, you have the power. It doesn't matter, right? It's like, you know, the worst thing I ever see that people do is when I see farmers and truckers and a specific cohort of people go to a city and block it up for a day with their tractors and trucks and stuff, and all go home in the evening, and they're stopping every bloody pub nearly on the way down, right, okay, to their homes, right? It's like a day out.
I'm not sure if this is the same everywhere. We have to say this is maybe an Irish example. I don't know.
We love everybody. We're just putting it out. This is just Donal.
Whatever they do it for a day, and it's a waste of time. If you are going to get heard, you must stay. Stay consistent and stop. Shut down the city if you're going to be serious about being heard. And then I guarantee you, after 5 days of that, costing a city somewhere in the region of maybe 10 to 20 billion a day, if it's a big city, they'll come out and they'll say, okay, what is it going to take to get you? And if you're educated or aware, you were able, instead of having placards that make no sense, you'll be able to stand and say, I want you to give me back that amount of money you took from me instead of paying insane bond fees over here all of the time when we see that this currency system is not working. Simple and as plain as that.
And this is a really important part of the solution. So many people believe, well, I'm in debt or I'm paying the education of my kids. Where am I going to find this extra money from? And, it's already so difficult and I don't want to lose what I already have. And the amazing thing is the power of people coming together and staying strong for each other, being part of communities like the Quantum Bridge and Quantum Mogul. There is really strength in terms of people coming together. A great example of this, of where consumers really put their money where their mouth is, where they really spoke up for environmental conservation and change. We can see this with tuna and the dolphins that were being trapped right in the net. It actually became a thing then for tuna companies to say, well, we're the dolphin-free tuna, or we're not using the unsustainable fishing practices that are then, trapping the dolphins. So many people actually over the world came together and refused to buy from these companies that had the practices, that were endangering the dolphins. So if that is possible, imagine what is possible when people say, no, we're not going to spend, or
we're not, we've had enough.
We've had enough, or
actually, I mean, I have a lot of time for people who have gone out and done all of these sorts of things. I appreciate they may not get what they expect out of it, but just taking action in itself is incredible. It's just somewhat misdirected action. Because if your action is to stop feeding those systems that are oppressing you, right? One, it's sustainable. Secondly, you might have a better quality of life, buying better food, better products from those sellers that are outside of that, or in your own network, in your own location, and so on. All of those things, which actually has a wonderful knock-on effect for the environment as well. So you can do things, one, that actually probably end up being better for you, better food, better lifestyle, better clothing, all of those things, whilst at the same time disempowering those organizations that are oppressing you. And you don't need to stop doing it. In fact, the more you do it and your friends do it and your family do it and your network do it, the more that those prices and so on can also come down. So there is a real cycle that you can work here where it's not that downward spiral, there is an upward spiral. And coming back to your point, Jasmine, this is also about the power of networks. What we have here and what we have as Quantum Bridge generally with our network, and now the audience, which is wonderful, and what you guys have in those ways and the ripple effects, really in the end, for me, coming back to value will be those sorts of networks. It will move beyond financial value to the value of people and souls and so on, which is, a very different conversation. But that's really, I think, where we're going to move to. And I'd love another conversation with you guys, because we're always coming to the end of time, it seems. But I'd love to focus on this thing about how do we empower both ourselves and our spending to create the world we want to see. And I think that you guys could help us find a way of doing that.
We would love, of course, to help you in that. And again, just something comes to mind immediately, and that we can, it's the thought, right, for the next time we speak, is what is your trigger point? You were talking about trigger points a while ago. What is the trigger point that will get you to say enough is enough? And I'll give you an example of what happened here in Ireland. We're one of the few countries, and I think we're the only country in the world, or Europe anyway, that doesn't have water rates, water taxes for have it for commercials, but not for residential. And of course, because we're part of the European Union, the European Union, of course, are putting the pressure on. Of course, they could see it as another taxing system and all that, right? So there was a huge resistance to it, huge resistance, but it was still going through. But there was 100,000 people going on the street every weekend, and they were very, very, very determined. And so, but you could still see that it was going to get through until one arrogant minister that we had said one statement, right? One statement. He said, if you don't agree with this water rates, I will turn down the water power in the country to a trickle, and mothers will not be able to wash their children. That was it. That was it.
When you started going after the moms and the babies, people were not up for it. That was
the trigger point. That finished it, right? Irish water became a complete joke, right? if he just didn't say that statement. So for the listeners that are listening here today, what is your trigger point? How much more is it going to take
before you say enough is enough?
you say enough is enough? And that was a real proof thing here in Ireland, and we still have no water rates. Like, Irish Water exists, right, but we're still not paying any water, and they're afraid to revisit it. Any minister is afraid to revisit it after what happened.
As they should be, because those that ostensibly rule us should be worried about us, not the other way around. So that's a great story to end on. I'm sorry, guys, that as ever it seems running tight on time. But look, as always, please do come back and join us again. There's so much more ground to cover, and I want to thank you, obviously, now for all of that awareness and education from today. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It's our pleasure.
Take care.
From the Quantum Bridge, goodbye.